I don't identify with being anything but a pop star. Always, right? So like I never identified as like a person who had been broken or anything like that. I always just was angry that this had happened to me and I was going to show you all.
Welcome to Chasing Chaos with Sheila Hamilton. Tonight's guest, songwriter, producer, filmmaker, and activist, Logan Lynn. Now, please welcome your host, Sheila Hamilton.
Welcome to Chasing Chaos. I'm your host, Sheila Hamilton, and today we have such an awesome show for you. Our guest is truly the definition of triple threat, if you multiply that by 10. He's a songwriter, producer, filmmaker, TV personality, and activist. In 2017, he received the prestigious Award of Excellence from the National Council for Behavioral Health for his advocacy work and for founding the Keep Oregon Well campaign, which you know I love, which fights the stigma of mental illness. And more recently, he joined forces with tech company Top Level Design to bring his .gay platform to market alongside George Takei, Glad, Adam Lambert, and many others. Advocate magazine writes, somehow a kid who grew up in a fundamentalist Christian church where even musical instruments were too secular to have around has developed into an innovative adult musician with a dirty, honest edge, blunt, raunchy, and fun. That's my friend, Logan Lynn. So good to see you.
Good to see you too. It's been too long.
You're honestly one of the very few people that I know that took quarantine so seriously. You literally did not leave your house. How did you manage this?
I have managed it in different ways throughout the last year. You know, like at first I was like, stay home, save lives. And then it sort of moved into like a really fear-based thing. I think I went full agoraphobic a little bit where I was like, danger. Getting the mail was like a Mission Impossible experience in the middle of the night. Like it just really went into, I don't want to get this mode. And I don't want to give this mode.
You've got to be close to getting your vaccine, aren't you?
Yes, I am finally getting vaccinated. So it's been interesting. I know people are all experiencing this where, there's a million different tools. You're not really totally sure where to check all the time. Like I was in that and felt very like every time they would get doses available, I was like, it was almost like getting concert tickets used to feel in the night.
Yeah.
Like I must see New Kids on the Block.
Totally.
Like you were at that point, you had to like go to a grocery store and do it like at the Ticketmaster counter. This felt very intense in some way. Like, and I think a lot of that intensity was me probably like projecting into that. But I eventually joined a group online and was able to get a vaccine just today. I joined this group this week. Got a vaccine appointment this morning. I'm going on Friday. I'm the last person in my family to be vaccinated. And so I'm just feeling so hopeful and excited about it.
So I've been fascinated watching your projects during this because you took out a new album. You launched the Foundation for Portugal the Man, which is just doing such fabulous stuff, especially for Indigenous peoples. You have a new series with the website that you launched, .gay, which I want to hear everything about. And then you have this, which is, of course, just killing me, this collab with Gucci that requires you every day to get dressed, to look amazing. I mean, did you think you were going to have like this much juice to be able to give during the pandemic?
I certainly have spent a lot of time alone in my life, growing up, whether it was in the church environment or homeschool, like I've spent a lot of time alone. And then certainly when I was living out my active addiction, that was in solitude. And then early recovery, like I was very much alone and sort of locked in the house, keeping myself safe. So I actually think I had built up a muscle around this that a lot of people hadn't, where like I have made peace with the difference between being alone and being lonely, and have always had to kind of make things happen myself out of nowhere, oftentimes in a room somewhere.
That's so fascinating, Logan, because your story, especially your story of trauma, is probably one of the most incredible healing journeys that I've ever heard. And I really want people to understand that even though trauma defines us, we also have to start looking at these muscles that we develop as a response to it. So tell people a little bit about how you grew up and what happened to you, just so they get a sense of your bigger story.
I was born into an unfortunate community. I am an out gay person. I came out of my mother's womb the same out gay person, right? Like I was a gay baby. I was definitely always gay. And as a child in this environment, this church environment that was anti-gay and really preached and believed that gay people were going to go to hell and that you had demons in you, like all of these things, like, as an innocent child, I really was born into. And so that was already a layer of unfortunate. I think the thing that happened to me early on when I was 7 years old was a family friend sexually abused me, over the course of time, really injured me spiritually and physically and sexually. And I was so young and already experiencing this weird religious world where I didn't fit, that really sent me into a tailspin really early on. I started drinking and smoking and doing drugs around the age of 10, 11, 12, and was a full-blown drug addict by the time I was 14. And ultimately, a lot of that community stuff early on where I felt like I lost everything. I lost my family, I lost my friends, I lost my sense of self in a way, propelled me to have to find out who I was really early on. It didn't actually have the effect that a lot of those adults probably thought it would, the shunning me or any of that stuff. It actually ended up strengthening my resolve and forcing me to really become myself, but not without struggle. I think because of what had happened to me and because of my early realization that using chemicals could actually take some of that struggle out. So I had a 16-year addiction to cocaine, alcohol, crack cocaine that ended in 2008 after I OD'd for whatever number OD that was. I finally met a doctor who saw me and helped me understand that the reaction I was having to the trauma was what I was living out, right? Like that I hadn't actually decided to be a drug addict. I hadn't actually decided to lose my family and my home and all of the stuff that I lost, but that it was actually me doing my best with what I had. And what I had was a really raw deal.
I want you to just go back. I've seen some videos of you, like with your dancing and your choreography, and there was just still so much joy in your face and your movement and your just incredible talent even then. And yet I was thinking this was already when the abuse was going on. So could you go back and maybe set a story that was kind of pivotal to you deciding I'm still going to be who I am?
Cognitive dissonance is magic. So when I was little, I went straight into a place where I really believed I was on Kids Incorporated, which was a Disney Channel show, and was friends with Tiffany, the pop star, friends with Debbie Gibson, the pop star. And like I dreamed and wished so hard in 1987 that all of those 1987 dreams and wishes actually have come true.
I just think that that is such a wonderful message for people to, when they're searching for who they are, kind of go back to that 7-year-old. Like, what was that 7-year-old dreaming about?
We are kind of all who we were then. I think early on, that was how I dealt with it. That's why was able to maintain joy and love and a sense of myself, even in the midst of the drug addiction and all the stuff that came with, losing my home and just all of that stuff. I still always believed that I was a famous pop star.
I know. I love it.
I really did. And so eventually, when those opportunities came, I was ready. I mean, I was like, yeah, I'm a pop star. Let's go.
I've been doing this every day of my life.
Yeah.
I want to talk about you first coming out, and you were in this very staunch religious community, and they kind of told you these were demons, and you were sent to live with this other family and ultimately kind of ended up on the streets. At what point did you realize, oh my God, this is not a life that I can continue to live?
I think there was different moments along the way where I decided that the risk of death or being hurt out there was better than what was happening to me in my community. When I first came out, I was outed by a therapist actually to my parents and had to go live with another family in Tennessee. It was terrible, right? And I think I also was coming around to having hormones and sex being a thing. And so, like, all the weird sexual violence that I had experienced early on resurfaced and like fueled my drug addiction. Like, it was just like insanity. I chose to be a drug addict. I mean, I really did at a certain point decide this is the only way that I can be alive, right? That actually being awake requires these things. And for many years that was coke, and eventually that was crack and alcohol. And I would say I didn't decide to stop doing that. I don't think I ever would have had the wherewithal to make that decision. My body decided that it was done. And so I had a partial stroke, went to the hospital, and finally met a doctor who connected me to what was happening. I spent a year in treatment and have since spent the last 13 years, it's 13 years ago last month, getting well, becoming myself again, putting things back together. And I would say that I have done a full-fledged bounce forward. Like, there's like bouncing back from trauma, and then there's like becoming who you always should have been and would have been without what happened to you, right? Like, and I have healed and actually become that.
I love it. I was looking at some stats from Mental Health America, and suicidal ideation is so high right now. 4 in 10 young adults from 11 to 17 have self-reported suicidal ideation, and the number's even higher with young gay men trapped at home. If all of this had happened to you during a pandemic, if you had not only not been able to escape your home, but couldn't have found another community of people, regardless of what their activities were, that allowed you to be gay, imagine the kind of trauma you'd be going through now.
I think had the internet existed back then, it's hard to say whether I would have found community and acceptance or found a much faster way to go down. You just never know. I'm glad that I am not a young person right now. I I don't say that a lot, but this is one of the times where it's got to be so hard.
Oh, it is. And do you have like any kind of advice or just even something that could calm someone down who is young in that age range, 11 to 17, gay, terrified to come out?
Come out on your own schedule when it feels safe. I think if I were to give myself advice back then, I might say, hey, dude, maybe hold on a second, right? Like, wait till you get over here so you don't get your ass kicked. So, like, there's some things like that that actually are practical ways of empowering LGBTQ people to come out in a way where you're seen and celebrated and held. And so I think it's you don't have to feel this pressure because you see me being big, loud, gay to like also be big, loud, and gay. You can become yourself on your own timeline. And the real thing is we need more queer people in the world. We need more trans people in the world that are adults, that have grown up, that are happy and healthy and celebrated. And the way to do that is to stick around.
Just going to let that sink in because it's especially right now with the rate of suicide among LGBTQ plus people. I just really want people to hear that. The way to do it is to stick around.
We'll be right back with more Chasing Chaos after this brief message.
Today's true story comes from our volunteer, Kathy. I discovered NAMI after retiring. I became a certified instructor for our basics, peer-to-peer, and family-to-family classes. A very consistent message that we hear from our students is, I finally realize I'm not alone. Or, wow, I'm not the only one who deals with this. And especially in our peer-to-peer class, people suddenly recognize that they're not to blame for their struggles with mental health. When you're first diagnosed with a mental health condition, there's suddenly a lot of information thrown at you. You may be trying to get your medications and treatment in order, and it can be overwhelming. Our classes help with this because we teach self-care, meditation, and how to relax. At NAMI-Clackamas, it's important to us that you know you're not alone.
In this cool blog post that you just wrote, 20 years ago this month, I was homeless in San Francisco, living in a pay-by-the-hour hotel in the Tenderloin, trying desperately to convince people that I was a normal person instead of a junkie who was starving and scared and just barely hanging on. now that you've been in recovery like 13 years, right?
Yeah.
And you have the ability to look back. Do you think you could share just a little bit more about what led to that period in your life and where someone or some person might have been able to help you, Logan, at that point when they saw how desperate you were becoming?
People did try to help me. Lots and lots of people let me sleep in their basement, bought me pizza on the street, gave me drugs because that's what I needed at the time, right? Like lots of people helped me or tried to help me, but I was unhelpable. I was inconsolable, and I was in cocaine psychosis for a vast majority of those 16 years, completely unattached to reality. And so people would help me and I would fuck them over. People would lean in and I would hurt them somehow. You know what I mean? Like it was like I was a dangerous person to assist back then. And so after I had gone through every human person I had ever met or known, I did end up homeless. I had nowhere to go. And so those Tenderloin hotels are there for people like me, if you can afford that, right? Like I look back on that as like, God, I'm so glad I was able to sell drugs enough to afford that hotel. You know, like
Right.
it's people have this thing around, well, you're selling drugs, you're committing crimes. It's like, yeah, I am. And
Yeah.
the reason I am is because I am going to die.
Right.
If I don't eat, I'm going to die if I have to sleep in some dude's room tonight. Like these are survival choices that people make. And so I think a lot of what I experienced is luckily sort of in vignette, right? I don't have a real living, breathing experience of myself for those 16 years. And I'm really thankful for that. I think
Yeah.
that, the brain is magic. The brain does things to protect us. And we as human beings can pull ourselves out of anything. I guess, like for me, in retrospect, like that's my big takeaway for my story and my journey is just like, I was end of the line. Like I was done. I wanted to die and was going to. And if you gave me an opportunity, I took it. For me to have found peace and to have built something out of nothing, that story that you're mentioning, I scammed enough people to go and buy myself a Gucci hat and like two outfits that I wore to interviews, pretending to be a person I was not even the same age. Like it was all a ruse. And one of those attempts worked. I got a job managing a store on the Haight Street, like as the general manager of something I had never done before, just straight up because I decided to project that I'm this person. And that was not honest. That was an act of survival. And that was like, hell hath no fury like a gay ginger scorned. Like come at me, world. Like at that point, I needed to survive for different reasons, but I still needed to survive. And I was able to parlay that into a life.
Yeah, I'm drawing this cool thread between the imagination that you had as a young gay child who saw yourself in this role. You weren't that either. You weren't a pop star, but you believed in some version of yourself. And I think it's a really like subtle mental health tip for people that even on those days where you can't believe yourself, you get up, you get dressed, you put on that Gucci hat or whatever the hat is that tells you that you can do this next thing. I want to ask any person who's watching now and just saying, I can relate to this guy so much. And I'm currently in my addiction. I'm currently in this place that Logan found himself. Do you have any suggestions for that person about a path forward?
Get a real, actual doctor, not somebody who's in a room full of strangers with a bunch of coffee. Find a real medical professional. And you got to be real about what you're going through. Like there's mental stuff, there's physiological stuff, and you often can't fix the mental stuff until you really take care of the physiological addiction. If you're at a place where you're at the end of the line, going from 0 to 100 is probably not an option. Go from 0 to 5 and go from 5 to 10, right?
I love that advice so much.
It takes time. And I think there's a narrative out there of like, abstinence is the only thing that matters. You're only in recovery when you're at the end of this journey. And the reality is that you're in recovery the moment you decide you're in recovery. And that looks like a lot of different things for a lot of different people. And for me, it looked like gradually stepping down from the very hardest core of drugs to less hardcore to no drugs.
Yeah.
Right? Like that was the deal for me. And it has really, it's why I'm here. I was in rehab 16 times before, which actually evens out to once a year if you do it like that, even though that's not really how it happened. But like that last one took because someone was willing to let me be in the space in recovery that I was able to do. And then they walked me through that journey.
I've often thought when I'm walking downtown and I see a young person that I can tell is probably suffering with a lot of trauma and a lot of mental health. What's your perspective on these young people, especially with how explosive the problem has been in Portland in the last, 5 years?
The one thing that I remember from that time is people being kind to me, So like I remember vividly a woman named Janet Tandy, who's a friend of my mom, would come and find me and buy me pizza. I remember vividly Courtney Taylor from the Dandy Warhols inviting me to the auditorium studio at one point, just because he was being nice. And like, they took me under their wing and let me record and did all this stuff because of that moment of connection. So I guess I would say to people like that are encountering folks that are on the streets or that are clearly experiencing something, that there are still people that matter and that nobody chooses that, right? Like anybody you're experiencing on the street like that is experiencing something far worse than you experiencing them on the street. So I think staying compassionate, remembering that people first is actually how we should be sort of creating our cities and our policies. And if someone says they need help, they really probably do. Some of what I needed back then was like money to just do whatever I needed to do to get through the day. And so I think, giving freely is important and not assigning a sort of a moral bar to your gift where like, oh, you're a drug addict, I'm not giving you money. Oh, you're dirty, I'm not giving you money. Whatever that is, like, the dirtiest drug addict is who you should probably be kindest to.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. I want to just talk now about, the weight of trauma in your life and how you begin to focus less on the trauma and more on these incredible resilience skills and the bouncing forward part. How have you done that? Just give me a day-to-day experience of Logan in viewing the trauma in your life versus viewing your resilience and your health and your well-being.
I don't identify with being anything but a pop star. Always, right? So like I never identified as like a person who had been broken or anything like that. I always just was angry that this had happened to me and I was going to show you all.
Yeah. I want to shift gears to this very cool .gay project because it's a place where there's free advice and support to people who are gay and also young people considering coming out. So looking back at the past year, how much more difficult do you think it was for these young people who were trapped at home with their parents? Or do you believe eventually they probably all found their way anyway because it's what we have to do to survive?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really hard to be a queer or trans kid in a home that isn't a queer or trans friendly home, right? Like that's terrible. And so being away from your friends, being away from your social supports, I think has been really tricky for that community of youth. .gay has been really cool. It's like .com or .edu, but it's fabulous. And like really built a digital pride over the last year. And it was the most successful internet domain launch in internet history. It's been really amazing to see how many people actually like that. We actually need each other, and it doesn't matter where you are in the globe. LGBTQ people need to find each other wherever you are.
What do you think is going to happen in this awkward transition as we're trying to get back to normal with members of the gay community?
The reality is that the gay community has experienced really horrible pandemic loss before.
Yeah.
I grew up at the height of the AIDS crisis. I was obviously, as we talked about earlier, not living a safe life during that time. And so it was very pronounced, like this danger. I lost a lot of friends and an entire generation of my elders, like they're gone. And so I think all of us feel that, whether you're a young person or someone who was around for that, it's so similar. And so I think there's a community trauma that we're going to have to work through that is long standing. And I think reconnecting is probably going to be the easiest part. Gay people, LGBTQ people don't have a hard time finding each other and connecting. That's like the one thing we're able to do. So I believe those sacred spaces will come back and thrive, and we'll all have sex again, and pants will become on floors again, whatever we were doing before. I'm sure it's going to happen.
In the blog that I mentioned earlier, you closed with this really beautiful note where you say, if you're in the middle of the struggle, giving up on yourself and the idea of a future for your life, don't stick around so some strange joy and glamour can find you too. I was reminded of how much joy and glamour Pretty Baby brought into your life, the gorgeous rescue that you took from being an abused and neglected and so skinny. And will you bring her into the screen so people can see?
He's right here.
So I want you to share your 5 tips for those that are striving to rediscover their joy, Logan.
It's Logan's 5 tips. Today, choose glamour over shame.
Number 1, stop caring about what other people think. It doesn't matter. For folks in recovery or anybody who's struggled in their life, shame can be a real barrier for healing and moving forward. The secret is shame is not useful. Number 2, stop bullying yourself. I'm bad at this. It's mean and not useful. Also, the world, so mean already. You don't need to be part of that. Be nice to yourself. Number 3, find something that you love and lean in. There's actually no extra credit for suffering in life, and so you may as well not. Also, if somebody or something is not serving you well, is making you unhappy, making you feel crappy, burn that bridge. This is the beauty of bridges. You just burn them down, and then you can bask in the glow of their beautiful flames. Number 4, fight like hell. Fists, fight like hell. You should. You're always going to be your own best advocate in business, in healthcare, as a queer or trans person navigating the world. And I have found it really important in my own healing journey to be able to tell certain people to go fuck themselves. It's a part of it. It's medicine. You got to take your medicine. Tell them to. Number 5, find some love and build your days around it. For me, this has looked like rescuing dogs and collaborating with my heroes. Ultimately, I figure if love is at the center of what I'm doing, then good things are going to happen.
I first just want to give you the biggest smooch through the Zoomies because
Right back at you, always.
Oh my God, I just love you so much, Logan.
Love you too.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Chasing Chaos and my conversation with Logan Lynn. Follow his glam adventures at loganlynnmusic.com, Logan Lynn Official on Instagram, and listen to his music on Spotify and iTunes. It's so good, and you have a new album coming out too. To learn more about .K, visit ohhey.gay. Tune in next time to hear more gritty stories and find genuine answers on the path to your well-being. I'm your host, Sheila Hamilton, and I hope you stay strong.
Retake command of your life. Watch all 6 episodes of Chasing Chaos with Sheila Hamilton, Season 1, now at chasingchaos.me. Take an even deeper dive into mental health while building a toolbox for better living in the hit podcast, Beyond Well with Sheila Hamilton. Listen now on iTunes and Spotify. Get the latest tools and resources to manage your well-being, plus learn how to keep safe, get tested, and where to be immunized for COVID. Visit NAMI-CC.org. We hope you'll share this episode of Chasing Chaos with your friends. Tag your post with Chasing Chaos. And while you're still with us, remember, you can help others retake command of their lives. Make a donation to fund NAMI's life-changing classes, support groups, and programs. Every dollar makes an impact. Just click the Facebook donate button or visit NAMICC.org/chasingchaos. Thanks again for watching. Stay strong.